So, what is the Iowa Plan? To learn more about it, we turn to Sam Wang, a redistricting expert. He's published work on redistricting and examined different methods being used by various states for drawing lines. Tell me about the Iowa Plan. How does it work?
Well, there have been a lot of attempts to take redistricting out of the hands of politicians and put them into more neutral hands. And the Iowa plan was one of the early attempts to do that. It's one of the earliest approaches to coming up with nonpartisan approaches to redistricting. And it dates to a time when it was possible for administrative staff to make a recommendation and have it taken up without controversy. And so because of the culture of Iowa, they've actually been fairly fortunate in being able to use that output without a lot of rancor and division at the legislative level. The plans recommended by the Iowa Commission are optional for adoption by the legislature. They can turn it down and replace it with their own if they follow the mechanisms that are in Iowa law.
Now, you just said because of the culture of Iowa, is Iowa's makeup different than Ohio? Is it much smaller, much more compact? I mean, what are you talking about
I
there?
think it's just that Iowa has a longer history of dealing with nonpartisan redistricting. Since the Iowa example, as I said, it was one of the earliest. There have been several decades of attempts at redistricting reform. And ever since the 1990s, American politics has gotten more polarized and more contentious. And so with that, it's become necessary to put in more seatbelts to write into the law the kind of good faith that people used to engage in back in the 1980s. And so now there have been later experiments plugging loopholes. There have been loopholes closed progressively, successively, more and more careful approaches to the law in Arizona, Michigan, Colorado, and the proposed initiative that's on the ballot in Ohio learns from all those examples, not only Iowa, but also the improvements that have come afterward.
So the current redistricting proposal that's on the ballot has elements of Iowa in it then?
It does. It has elements of Iowa in it, but what it does is it puts it in the hands of experts working for citizens. So it's a commission of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. They come together and they have to vote on a supermajority basis in order to pass anything. And so the proposed law in Ohio that's on the ballot this November requires a consensus to be reached among these different factions.
Is that an improved version of Iowa, maybe?
Yes, the closest model to the Ohio proposal is what was passed in Michigan a few years ago, and also in, as I said, in Colorado and Arizona. So, so the idea is to build a mechanism where these three different groups, partisans and also people who are not partisans, all have to come together, work together, have public hearings. There's a fairly detailed procedure in the Ohio law that that learns from a more recent example, and the most recent examples are Michigan and Colorado.
The Iowa plan itself, going back to it ultimately still depends on lawmakers in the legislature to pass it, right?
Yes, lawmakers must still approve the plan in Iowa.
And in Ohio, we have had in Ohio, we have had a legislature that has been fractured, where it is difficult to get anything passed. Do you think that that could be a problem if the ballot measure is scrapped in November and somehow we come back with an Iowa plan, the legislature comes back with an Iowa plan next year that depends on the legislature to pass it? Do you think there could be enough contention that it could be a problem?
Well, the way I would put it is that any state that has one party firmly in control is going to have a natural conflict of interest in doing a good job in redistricting, whether it's Republicans or Democrats in charge. Over and over, we've seen at the Gerrymandering Project, we've seen examples where a single party in charge has very little incentive to take into account a broad range of needs, whether it be of communities or political parties, or any really needs of the state. It's just the temptation is overwhelming to self-deal. And it's just really hard for any human, including a politician, to overcome that temptation.
Is there a magic bullet out there for redistricting, some method that really seems to work, or do you think the Ohio plan that's proposed is that method?
The Ohio plan that's on the ballot this November comes the closest to being a silver bullet to getting to fair districting. It's, of course, tough to come up with a good plan, just as it's tough to come up with a bulletproof, say, contract when you're selling a house. But a lot of good people have thought pretty hard about the Ohio proposal, and they've figured out ways to make sure that everyone's needs are accounted for and there's an equitable outcome. It appears, I would say, in comparison to other recently enacted plans, it appears to be a pretty good strategy for closing loopholes.